You wake to the sound of silk tearing. The candle beside your bed has melted into a puddle, and the air smells of rosewater and blood. You were once the bride of Christ. Now you are property of the Sultan. The gates closed behind you days ago, but their echo still rings inside your skull. Outside, the empire prays. Inside, the palace whispers, they told you this was mercy, that the nuns would be protected, but protection has another name in this empire, possession. So you kneel not before the altar, but before a man who calls himself God's shadow on earth. And as his eyes find you in the torchlight, one truth pierces deeper than any blade. Your faith was never meant to save you, it was meant to keep you quiet. Dawn filtered through stained glass, painting the stone floors in crimson and gold. The convent was quiet, save for the gentle clatter of rosary beads sliding through trembling fingers. You could almost believe the world outside had not changed, that the war was a distant storm, far beyond these walls. Sisters moved like shadows along the corridors, their faces pale but serene. Candles flickered on wooden altars, their scent mingling with the faint perfume of lilies in the gardens. You knelt by the fountain, watching its waters swirl like liquid prayer, whispering your devotion into the morning. Here within these walls, time seemed sacred, and yet a sense of unease lingered in the corners, a trembling in the wind that the candles could not hold back. The letters from the outer villages had grown darker, rumours of advancing armies and conquered towns seeping into your sanctuary. Still, you told yourself that faith would be enough, that prayers could hold back men with swords, that the cross above the doorway was a shield, invisible but absolute. Little did you know, innocence was a fragile thing, and that very fragility would soon be tested by a force that recognized neither prayer nor mercy. The cloister's peace was the last illusion you would ever know. It began with a thunder that shook the walls. Horses' hooves struck the cobblestones like drums of doom. Doors splintered under iron, and the sisters' screams intertwined with the shouts of soldiers. Smoke curled into the halls, scented with burning oil and fear. You were dragged from your bed, your habit torn from your shoulders. The world you had known of candlelight, whispered hymns, and shared confidences vanished in a second. The soldiers spoke in harsh, guttural commands, their eyes cold, their hands unyielding. Every step they forced you to take toward the courtyard felt like a step into a new, unspeakable reality. In the gardens, the cages waited, small, suffocating, with bars too close together for comfort. Sisters were shoved inside, their tears dampening the straw that lined the floors. You saw their faces pressed to iron, eyes wide, mouths open in silent prayers that would go unanswered. One sister whispered a hymn, her voice trembling, and a soldier silenced her with a cruel strike. Faith alone could not shield you. The nuns, who once believed they were untouchable, were now bargaining chips, their devotion stripped and measured. And in that chaos, a deeper horror began to settle in your chest, that the world beyond the cloister had rules you could not understand, rules that did not bend for the holy, the innocent, or the meek. By nightfall, the convent was no more than smoke and shadows. The surviving sisters were corralled onto carts and forced into the narrow streets, their chains rattling in rhythm with the horse-drawn wheels. The city around you had grown silent, the distant glow of torches casting long dancing silhouettes. You pressed your face to the cold bars of the cage, listening to the whispers of the sisters, the sobs that could not be quieted. Every sound was a reminder of what had been stolen: safety, sanctity, even the quiet dignity of prayer. The horses' hooves clattered against stones slick with evening dew, carrying you farther from the world you had known. As you were pulled into the darkness of the road, you felt the weight of anticipation, dread, and resignation folding into one. The unknown stretched before you like a vast, empty corridor, each mile a step away from light and toward shadow. The sky above was a blank canvas, void of stars, as if the heavens themselves had turned their gaze from the fallen sisters, and yet in the trembling of your hands and the soft murmur of your prayers a flicker remained, not hope, not exactly, but the stubborn ember of identity, of who you had been before the empire claimed you. That ember would have to survive what came next, the merciless reality of the Sultan's world. The march was long. Your chains bit into wrists already raw from fear. The scent of hay, sweat, and iron filled the night air. Every face around you was a mirror of despair. Every echo of sobs a reminder that innocence alone could not protect you by dawn. The cloister was a memory, and the journey into captivity had only just begun. The gates of Topkapi Palace loomed like a dream or a cage gilded in gold torches lined the path, their flames dancing over intricate tiles, illuminating faces too beautiful to be human. Perfume hung thick in the air, mingling with the warm scent of baked bread and roses. The soldiers released the sisters from their carts, and you stepped onto marble that seemed to promise safety, yet whispered something far more sinister. A eunuch approached first, bowing so low it seemed he might touch his forehead to the stone. "Welcome," he said softly, and the words slid like honey over broken lips. Velvet robes were offered, and silken sheets, and rooms that smelled of jasmine and saffron. Your chains were removed, replaced by bracelets of silver that glittered like captive stars. You expected prison, brutality, or at least cold indifference instead. Comfort enveloped you like a soft blade. Each touch, each gentle word was designed to disarm, and slowly, horrifyingly, it worked. The sisters' wide eyes softened, their panic blurring into confused awe. You wanted to resist, to hold on to the fear that had kept you alive, but the palace was a master at rewriting instinct. The Sultan's mercy was not kindness, it was strategy. And as you were led to the bath, to soft beds, to fragrant oils for your hair, the first seed of understanding took root. You were no longer guests. You were property, wrapped in velvet, perfumed, and trapped within walls that whispered obedience. The bath was the first step. Hot water lapped at your skin as attendants washed away the grime of the journey and, subtly, the markers of identity. Your hair, once braided and modest, was combed, perfumed, and adorned with ornaments that felt foreign and heavy. Habits were exchanged for gowns that shimmered but clung in ways meant to entice, to display, to signal surrender. Lessons followed in posture, speech, and the smallest gestures: how to sit with elegance, how to fold hands just so, how to smile without invitation and laugh without joy. Mirrors became tools of judgment, reflecting not the self you had known, but the carefully curated image the palace demanded. You learned that beauty could be a weapon, one wielded against your own mind. Food was laid out in abundance, each bite a reminder that survival came with compromise. Sweetmeats, spiced stews, and honeyed wine indulgence. Yes, but with eyes always upon you, measuring your compliance, your quiet, your obedience. Luxury became a cage of its own, the softness of velvet and the warmth of oil marking the first cracks in resolve. By the third day, the sisters whispered of being chosen, of having favour. You realised that favour was a currency you did not earn, but one the empire could bestow or withdraw at will. The palace did not need to strike to control. It merely had to dress the chains in gold and perfume, and you would soon forget the weight of iron. Nights were the hardest. Behind closed doors, the echoes of your sisters' sobs reminded you of what remained of the old world, Yet even in sleep, the palace infiltrated your mind. Dreams of convent halls became twisted, candles burning into molten rivers, rosaries melting into silver threads you could wear as chains. The first humiliation came in subtle ways. A question asked incorrectly, a glance misread, and the attendants would tilt their heads, smile, but the reprimand was clear. Obedience was measured not in harsh punishment, but in the quiet erosion of your will. The velvet and perfume dulled the senses, made the mind pliable. You began to question yourself. Was this captivity, or a new world you could not yet name? By the end of the week, the reality of ownership pressed down like a gentle weight that could crush if resisted. Your identity, once defined by faith and ritual, blurred. Every polished floor, every scented corridor, every attentive gesture from attendants whispered the same message. You are no longer yours. You belong here. Even rebellion became a secret act, hidden in stolen glances, in whispered prayers, in fingernails carving crosses into the wood of the bath. The palace allowed small sparks, knowing they would never ignite a fire large enough to burn its walls. Comfort had become a weapon, and it struck harder than chains ever could. You understood, finally, that the Sultan's mercy was not an escape from cruelty. It was its most cunning disguise. And as you lay on silk sheets that smelled faintly of rose water and despair, you realized that survival in this world would demand more than obedience. It would demand surrender of the self. There were no written rules, only whispers. The palace did not need ink or parchment to enforce obedience. It had eyes in every mirror, ears behind every curtain. The lessons began at dawn, when the halls were still heavy with incense and the echoes of last night's footsteps. Walk as though the floor forgives you, one attendant said, tracing a path with her slippered feet. Do not speak unless spoken to. When the eunuchs approach, bow your head. When the Sultan's shadow falls upon you, breathe softer. Each instruction felt small, harmless, yet each chipped away a fragment of identity. You learned to eat when told, to sleep when permitted, to smile when desired. Silence was not simply encouraged, it was demanded. The palace was a labyrinth of rules disguised as kindness, each corridor a test of how well you could erase yourself. Among the women, hierarchy ruled stronger than faith. There were those who had been there for years, their eyes like still water, their gestures flawless. They were both mentors and jailers, passing down the commandments of survival with practiced precision. Do not remember your old name, one whispered to you in the baths. Names make you human, humans bleed. Here, we do not bleed, we shimmer. In time, even your prayers began to fade from memory. Silence became your prayer, the rhythm of your breath, your only confession. You were no longer a nun. You were a shadow learning how to move in perfect obedience. Discipline in the palace came draped in silk. Punishment did not scream, it smiled. When a girl faltered, when her posture slouched or her voice cracked, the attendants corrected her with hands too soft to seem cruel. Grace, they murmured, lifting her chin. The Sultan's world loves grace. You watched as a sister stumbled during her lessons in dance. She was made to repeat her steps until her feet bled, the crimson soaking into marble that gleamed like polished bone. No one dared to help her. Compassion here was another rule broken. The palace had mastered the art of humiliation without violence. A misplaced word earned isolation. A tear during prayers invited laughter. They taught you that emotion was weakness, that devotion was foolish, that obedience was beauty. And each day the women polished their pain into perfection, smiling, bowing, shimmering like dolls carved from obedience itself. You began to understand the cruelty hidden beneath the elegance. The discipline was not about movement or manner, it was about control. Every gesture was a reminder that your body was no longer your own. Even breathing had a rhythm dictated by the unseen authority that ruled this golden cage. When you finally looked into the mirror, you saw a stranger's face looking back, the same eyes perhaps, but hollowed, calm, rehearsed. You had learned how to stand without trembling, how to smile without hope. You were learning, as they all had, that survival demanded silence more than faith. It did not happen in a single night. There was no moment of surrender, no breaking scream. It was quieter, like a candle slowly suffocating under its own wax. You began to move through the palace like smoke, unnoticed but perfectly shaped to its will. The days blurred together, lessons in language, posture, the art of pleasing. You said what they wanted, did what they asked, and with every passing day, your reflection in the polished floors grew fainter. Once, during a quiet evening, you caught a fragment of your old self, a hymn whispered under your breath as you brushed your hair. The melody felt foreign now, like a dream from another lifetime. The words faltered, your voice trembling, and you stopped, afraid even of your own sound. That was when you realized they hadn't taken your faith by force. They had taught you to bury it yourself. You slept on silk and dined on silver, yet each comfort carried its own curse. You were well fed but hollow, adorned but emptied. The more beautiful the palace made you, the less human you became. By the time the new captives arrived, wide-eyed, trembling, you greeted them with the same soft smile others had once given you. You found yourself teaching them the same rules, the same careful obedience. The cycle continued, and in your reflection, you saw what the empire truly desired, not your pain, but your quiet acceptance. And in that silence, the last fragment of the woman you once were the one who had prayed for mercy flickered, then vanished. In the quiet of night, when the palace corridors breathed only shadows, faith returned in whispers. Hidden beneath silk gowns, fingers traced crosses into the soft fabric, carving silent prayers that no one could see. Lips moved soundlessly, murmuring hymns from memory, their notes stolen from the convent and pressed into the dark like precious jewels. Every movement was deliberate, every glance measured. Candles flickered in the corners of chambers, and the sisters' eyes met in secret. A brief nod, a shared understanding that devotion still lived. Even when the world demanded silence, faith became a clandestine act, a rebellion small enough to survive, yet daring enough to remind the soul it still existed. You carved a tiny cross beneath your wrist, hidden beneath a bracelet of gold given by the palace, and in that act, the rush of memory and identity surged. You remembered the convent, the smell of old wood, the gentle chime of bells, the quiet power of collective prayer. Here, in the gilded halls of the sultan, those memories became dangerous weapons, burning quietly beneath your skin. Yet, the empire was patient, and its gaze was everywhere. The golden walls whispered of surveillance, the soft laughter of attendants a constant reminder that even your shadows were not safe. Faith, you learned, had become a perilous art. To pray, to believe, to exist quietly, without notice. The very act of remembering, of devotion, was a defiance cloaked in the gentlest of disguises. Inevitably, shadows falter. A sister's hymn escaped too loudly, carried by the wind into the corridors. A carved cross was discovered in a folded gown. The palace did not punish with screams or chains, it punished with precision, with psychological cruelty that unspooled your courage into silent fear. The offenders were brought before the Sultan's advisors, not to shame publicly, but to make the invisible visible. They were bathed, dressed, adorned, and then humiliated with subtle acts designed to break the soul. A brush across the hair that stripped identity, a touch that reminded them their bodies were no longer theirs. Food withheld, sleep delayed, isolation enforced. Fear was not wielded as a blunt instrument here, It was a whisper, a glance, a careful correction that taught obedience through dread. You watched your sisters crumble under invisible weights, the candle of faith flickering against the draught of authority. Some whispered confessions to the walls, to the shadows, anything to preserve what little remained of their inner selves. You began to question the limits of resistance. Could faith survive when every act of devotion invited danger? How far could belief stretch before snapping under the empire's gaze? Betrayal was not always intentional. The palace trained eyes and ears to see what you could not hide. Even a glance, a hesitated prayer, a momentary defiance could mark a sister for punishment. The cost of hidden faith was immediate, not always death, but something far more enduring. Fear that seeped into your bones, teaching silence even where courage still lingered. By the time months had passed, faith had become a secret rhythm, a heartbeat you could almost hear but rarely feel. Every whispered hymn, every hidden cross carried the weight of consequence. Devotion was no longer innocent. It was a gamble, a negotiation between survival and selfhood. You saw sisters broken by the palace's subtle cruelties, their eyes dull, their movements precise, their spirits bowed yet unwilling to entirely vanish. Each act of devotion exacted a toll. Sleep became uneasy, meals were eaten in silence, and every conversation weighed with the possibility of betrayal. Faith had become both sanctuary and prison. And still, in the darkness behind closed doors, faith persisted. You whispered prayers while brushing your hair, traced crosses under gowns, and recited hymns to yourself when no one listened. It was not loud, not heroic, but it was yours. And yet, you understood the ultimate truth. The empire could tolerate small sparks, but it demanded the soul remain pliable, invisible, obedient. The cost of faith, you realized, was both your humanity and your secret defiance. You could not be free and faithful simultaneously. The more you believed, the more carefully you hid it. Every act of devotion carried weight, yet refusing to surrender entirely preserved a fragile piece of self, a fragment of the nun who once knelt by fountains and prayed for mercy. In that silent war between belief and survival, you learned the cruelest lesson. Faith could endure, but only if you were willing to become a shadow, a ghost of devotion moving through the golden halls, unseen, unheard, yet alive. The palace whispered her name before she even realized it herself. She was summoned, one among many, yet singled out by invisible hands that dictated destiny in gold and velvet. Her heart raced with a confusion that mingled fear with the first taste of elevation. To be chosen meant survival, yes, but at a price she had yet to comprehend. The ceremony was both beautiful and cruel. Gilded halls shimmered with torchlight reflecting off polished marble. Silk robes were draped over trembling shoulders, crowned with ornaments that caught the flame and multiplied it across her face. The attendants whispered instructions, how to curtsy, how to lower her gaze, how to smile while her soul quaked. Her sisters watched from a distance, eyes wide, mouths pressed tight to hide tears. They did not speak. Words would have shattered the delicate mask of celebration. She stepped forward, carrying the weight of the cloister's memory and the burden of their collective gaze. Every movement was a negotiation between obedience and defiance, between self and role. When the sultan entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. The chosen nun knelt, feeling the power of the empire settle like lead upon her chest. It was elevation, yes, but one that pressed down with the invisible force of chains disguised as honor. Her crown was not simply adornment, it was the woven sacrifice of those who came before, a grim reminder that her rise required others' diminishment. The first step into favor was never free. She learned, as she bowed beneath the sultan's gaze, that glory here was inseparable from guilt. To be favored was to carry both light and shadow. Lavish meals, soft beds, and silk gowns came with constant scrutiny. Every word, every glance, every gesture was measured, recorded in invisible ledger books only the palace could read. She discovered quickly that favor was not freedom. The Sultan's attention was both a shield and a trap, granting privileges that isolated her from the sisters she loved and commanded obedience that suffocated her spirit. Her laughter was polished, her tears carefully hidden. Every moment of indulgence was shadowed by the knowledge that one misstep could undo the delicate web of her elevated existence. The burden weighed heavily in private hours when she recalled the faces of those left behind, sisters pressed into velvet cages, eyes wide with longing, mouths trembling with prayers that could no longer reach the heavens. Her crown, woven from strands of their hair, ached like iron. Every spark of comfort was tinged with the memory of their suffering. She began to see the subtle ways the palace taught loyalty, small favours that cultivated dependence, whispered reminders of her sister's fates, and rituals that blurred the line between self and possession. Being the Sultan's bride was not a reward. It was an experiment in obedience, a test of how much of her identity could be sacrificed while still appearing intact. Even in luxury she felt hollow. The glow of candles and the soft scent of rosewater could not hide the shadow of guilt etched into her bones. The empire had elevated her, yes, but only to ensure her spirit bent under its weight. Days melted into nights where power and intimacy were inseparable, where favour mingled with fear. The Sultan's presence was at once magnetic and terrifying. His gaze could soothe, but it could also wound without touch. She learned quickly how obedience could be a shield, and how any flicker of independence invited punishment, subtle but cruel. Love, or what resembled it, became another tool in the palace's arsenal. Affection was measured, gestures calculated, and smiles demanded. Yet beneath the velvet and gold, the truth remained. Her desires, her fears, her thoughts were never fully her own. Every pulse of emotion came tangled with guilt. Guilt for her own comfort, guilt for the survival she enjoyed while others suffered. Even intimacy became a crucible. What was meant to elevate her now threatened to fracture her further. In the quiet, she traced the strands of her sister's hair in the crown that adorned her head, feeling their sacrifice press against her skull. She understood, in every pang of desire and every smile, that her body, her presence, and even her soul were instruments of the empire, a theatre where pleasure and cruelty danced hand in hand, guilt and survival intertwined so tightly that she could no longer separate them. The palace had taught her that to live, to be chosen, she must carry the pain of others as her own. Every laugh, every favour, every whispered command pressed her into obedience, shaping her into a figure both exalted and imprisoned. By nightfall she lay beneath silken sheets, the golden crown heavy on her brow, and realized the ultimate paradox. Elevation here was indistinguishable from enslavement.